Well, if you're planning on building electric cars, well, I've got some news for you. The Canadian government has money for you. This time it's GM and a South Korean battery manufacturer getting $300 million to build components for EV batteries. But some have been critical of this funding, suggesting there are more important things that our money should be pumped into. How do you feel? Are you okay with the funds being thrown around right now for anything electric? Joining us now is Moshe Lander, senior lecturer in economics at Concordia University. Good to talk to you again, Moshe.
Hello.
Hello. So, what do you think about this apparent gold rush for anything electric vehicle related? I mean, the feds are pumping what now? The Parliamentary Budget Office says it's $16 billion for the Volkswagen plant in Ontario. Here in Quebec, the provincial government putting hundreds of millions of dollars to develop battery plants, and all the components having to do with battery plants. What do you think about all of this?
And let's not forget all of the subsidies, too, that were handed to people for buying the cars,
sure.
Right?
Right.
There's a huge amount of cash that's being thrown at it. Look, the government has stated that they want to greenify the economy, and unfortunately, they're not going to be able to do that without global agreement on things. So this is one of those areas then where they can at least say they're trying to do their part locally by trying to develop an industry that is probably going to be the future of cars. And at least what they're doing then is trying to put their money into something that is hopefully going to be commonplace within the next 10 to 20 years.
And the point that always comes up when I read about this, when I hear experts talk about this, all this money being pumped into this sector, is the fact, or maybe it's not even a fact, there seems to be this massive fear that the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which was passed by the Biden administration, got through Congress, which is going to inject some $400 billion into that greening of the U.S. economy, and already with the Buy America Act, there seems to be this fear, this knee-jerk reaction by the provincial governments, Quebec and Ontario, for example, and the federal government in Ottawa, that to sort of save or maintain certain industries in Canada, you're going to have to pump these enormous amounts of money. Am I onto something, or am I completely off the track?
No, you're right. It's almost kind of like a two wrongs make a right here, right? So because they've made a mess with that, Buy America Act, and because they're trying to distort the playing field in their direction, then we're going to distort it back at least to level ground by creating our own counterbalance. Part of it, though, is not even just crossing the border. Part of it is interprovincial. You're talking about the provincial government in Quebec. Think about how the field has been distorted by the Alberta government, throwing all kinds of cash and subsidies to develop an oil and gas sector, right? And all of the industries that have built up around that. So in a sense, there's also this interprovincial play that's going on. And that's why you see Danielle Smith out in Alberta getting so angry at Ottawa, because she views some of this spending as trying to move the economy away from oil and gas, which indirectly would be through the auto industry as well.
So are we in agreement with what the federal government and the provinces are doing right now? Is this a good thing? Because we've seen in the past, massive investments that have paid off in the long term. And I'm not asking you to look into any crystal balls here, Moshe, but do you think we're on the right track here, or are we actually investing way too much in this sector?
So I think the idea is correct. The only thing that always concerns me once the government starts putting money in is that everybody understands that once the government is involved, you can basically hold them to ransom. And so inevitably what we're going to hear is that more investment is going to be required, there's cost overrun, and the government is going to be on the hook to put up that money, right? Because the last thing they can do is walk away from a deal now, for example, with the battery plant in Ontario and say, you know what? We're not putting in any more cash. So just leave the factories half built, and all of the jobs that we promised, they're not going to materialize because we won out. There's no way for the government to get back the hundreds of millions of dollars that they've already put in. So everybody understands that they're now committed. So you can go back to them now and say, you know what? we're 200 million over. Give us the 200 million. And they could be on the hook for years and years and years. And that's where things start to turn ugly. Even if the government were to say right now, we're going to pass legislation that says, forget it. This is it. Don't ask us for any more. Nobody believes that. Mm-hmm. All it does is require just one new parliamentary act to override what they already say they're not going to do.
So, yeah, I totally agree with your analysis of the situation, but there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. It seems that anybody that's raising the hand, whether it's the provincial government in Bécancour or, like you said, in Ontario, I mean, Volkswagen, the big announcement, remember, François-Philippe Champagne, the industry minister, federally, announced what? It was $13 billion, and he thought, he hit a home run with that, and now it's going to be $16 billion, and it could be more, for ultimately what the Parliamentary Budget Office says is minimal return on investment. And so if the PBO is saying that, I mean, why are we spending all this money for little return?
We should make that conversation about a lot of government spending, right? The government's going to try and tell you then that they're not really interested in making a return. What they're interested in is trying to lay the tracks that direct the economy towards a particular outcome, right? So in this case, then, remember that the subsidies on electric vehicles were to merely try and create that bend in the hockey stick type growth where it can now sustain itself. So they're never going to see that money again. But what they would say is, look, if we hadn't spent that money to try and at least create that move, it would have taken an extra decade, or the amount of environmental damage that would have come would have been so much more than the amount of money that we put in. So it's not that we're actually getting a return, it's that we're trying to steer particular outcomes. So again, if that's what they're trying to do, you can't put a price tag on that. But I mean, the taxpayers can at least say, wait a second, I don't like that. And that's what creates then the tensions between the provinces. That's what creates the anger in Alberta. And that's what creates the anger among certain taxpayer groups that say, why are you using my money for this when there are so many other things that could deliver a return? Is the government in the business of trying to make a return on their investment? Or is the government merely trying to spend taxpayer money to generate certain social outcomes regardless of the return?
So, of course, we agree with one of the goals of all this is to clean up our environment. I mean, the fact is that switching to electric is the right thing to do. But again, I'm questioning the choice here. We seem to be going for building these cars, these electric cars, and we're buying more and more cars, just generally speaking. And so if we replace all our gas-powered cars with just electric cars, I mean, we're not winning, really, because, I mean, we're not investing in mass transit. We're not investing enough in getting people off individual cars. So, again, I'm not seeing the right economic choice here.
I agree. And so to me, if I were going to be creating the policy here, what I would be doing is I would be, first of all, if I'm going to spend government money, it's creating the infrastructure, not the actual product itself, right? So what's the government doing to make sure that there are power stations that can fuel these electric cars, right? So that you can drive it from coast to coast. You can do it through legislative acts. You can just say that beginning in 2030, all cars have to meet a certain environmental emission standard, or be subject to a huge fine, right? And that in itself would encourage development then, because the firms would recognize that, hey, there's going to be a huge demand for these cars in the next 5 years. So the government doesn't necessarily have to spend money that way. I think that when you do those types of things, though, it doesn't win votes. It doesn't create those amazing press conferences, and it doesn't create smiling business leaders saying that I love this government and look at what they're doing. So it's always politics, not economics. Yeah,
absolutely. And on top of that, we're doing all of this knowing, especially in Quebec, that we don't have enough hydropower. That's what's fascinating.
Yeah, and again, right, what should the government be doing at this point? They should be laying the framework to create infrastructure, right? So that's one of those things that infrastructure is always very difficult for private industry to create, because if you take a look at, for example, like in the cell phone market, right, when you make Rogers and Telus and Bell responsible for all of their infrastructure, there's a lot of duplication there, and there's a lot of wasted cost because each of them are essentially doing the same thing that the others are doing. If the government were to come in and say, look, we'll provide the infrastructure, now all of you can rent the infrastructure from us to use it for yourselves, Our cell phone bills would be substantially lower. There'd be more competition because the infrastructure is there, and the government's merely responsible for maintaining the infrastructure. We see that all the time with the government lays the train tracks, but the problem is when the government also tries to own the trains as well, they create problems, right? So here, they can be creating the infrastructure for electric vehicles to thrive and for a green economy to thrive, and then say to business, now that you know the infrastructure is going to be there for you, you go out there and compete with each other for delivering the best product at the lowest cost. That's what's good for all of us, and that's what creates the fastest change.
Great insights as always. Thank you so much for your time, Moshe.
Anytime.
Moshe Lander, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Concordia University.